Hello and welcome to another Learn for Free video on economics. So we have already discussed Unit 1 in three sections, 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. So now let's move on to Unit 2. I would call it Unit 3 because since the 1.3, the types of economic system, goes as a Unit 2, as a separate unit in my uh, text and workbook that I have written for economics. Right. Okay. So unit 3 is about market forces. Right. Now, when we discuss economics, economics can be discussed in actually to or economics, that means as a study, can affect our economy. What do we mean by an economy? Economy is, okay, in simple words, we can say it is a country. An economy is a group of, you know, people, customers, suppliers, that mean businesses, consumers, and in the modern world, we have government and all that. So, because historically, people have been living isolated from each other and then as communities, and then they have built up their communities. And that's how a community or an economy had started up. Right. So economics can, that means the factors in an economy can, or economic factors can affect both, the individual or just a single group in an economy, or the economic factors can affect the whole economy. In simple words, as we say, the whole country. So those factors which affect the whole country, we call those are macroeconomic factors, which is actually a separate section in economics, which we would discuss as we go further on after several units, maybe hopefully after the unit 10. But uh, those factors which affect just a few individuals or just a few group of people in a economy, we call such factors to be microeconomic factors. Micro. The macroeconomic factors means factors that affect the whole economy. Microeconomic factors means factors that affect the just a group of certain group of people, right? Okay. So we are, in fact, in the process of discussing now. In the first few units, we discussed actually the basic introduction into economics. So now we are starting to discuss the microeconomic factors. Okay. So one of the microeconomic factor means what is that is microeconomy means economic factors which affect a market. All right. So that's what we are about to discuss today. In market forces, there are two things that we will have to discuss: market forces, demand, and supply. So let's start demand. Right. So first thing we need to look at what a market is, since we are actually talking about forces in a market. Now, when we say forces, forces are, things, whether it is in physics, we say different types of forces, or whether it is, in maintenance of peace, the peace forces. So that means forces have some sort of control. So in the same way, we are to discuss about forces which have a control over a market. So let's talk about what a market is. What do we mean by a market? Now, some people might say, okay, market means, okay, in the morning sometimes, of course, we don't see that much nowadays, but we used to see people, carrying their shopping basket or a shopping cart and going in the morning. And then when you ask them, what are you going to do? I'm going to the market. Okay, so that's one thing, one example of a market. That means what do they mean by market is to the place where there are shops, there are sellers, who sell goods, and we as buyers, we go to buy. But a market doesn't have to be just that. So in economics, what do we mean by a market is it can be a place or it can also be just an arrangement. What's what are the conditions that are needed something to be called a market is the rest here which is explained. What's that? It can be a place or an arrangement that enables buyers and sellers to exchange goods and services. Right, okay. So that means any arrangement that allows, people to meet and buy or sell goods and services. So what kind of arrangement it can be? It can also be a telephone call. Sometimes people buy or sell goods and services over the phone calls. The buyer makes a call to the seller and asks for the details, inquires about the product and the price and all that. And maybe the seller would send some quotations and some pictures as well. And then if the buyer is interested, the buyer would say, okay, I want to buy. Or the buyer sees some newspaper or TV advertisements and they call and they place the order and then the product will be delivered home. So even this is a market. So what is simply a market is a market can be a place, a physical place like a marketplace or a supermarket or a shopping mall, arcades and all that. Or a market can also be just an arrangement that makes buyers and sellers to come in contact so that they can buy and sell goods and services. So in that case, what do we actually mean by market forces? What are market forces we mean by this is the factors like forces in physics, factors that controls the market is what we mean by market forces. Now, for that, let's take examples of two products. Now, what's a product means? A product can be a good or a service. Now, here I have taken a good and a service. One is the market for labor and other one is market for foreign exchange. So labor means workers, but not, of course, we cannot buy and sell workers, but their ability. The workers' ability to work may be physical or mental like that. So the labor and forex market, if you talk about, what are the forces? Now, every single market, although we don't, identify this on daily basis, but every simple product that we buy, it can be a paper or a piece of cloth we buy, anything that we buy has four important elements. Those are product, price, the buyer, whom creates a demand, and the seller or the supplier, right? So now the product in the labor market is labor itself. Labor means a worker's ability to work physically or mentally, right? So that's the product in the labor market. And what is the price of labor is wage. The wage rate is the name given to the price of labor. Every product has a price, and these prices can sometimes be generally the price of a particular product, or sometimes it can have a special name, like in the case of wages. Next, what we see in a market, in the labor market, is who buys the labor. That means who hires the workers. Those are the people who create demand for the workers. Okay, I need workers of this qualification, of this skill, of this age, maybe of this nationality or something like that, if that matters. So those are the people who create demand. And usually, who create demand for labor is the firms or the businesses or the employers. And on the other hand, who provide their skills to the employers are the employees or the labor force or the workers. So as you can see, in a labor market, you can see there are four elements. The product is labor, price is wages, buyer is the firm, and seller is the labor force. Now, if you can see here, now labor means what we are talking about, the labor quantity. That means how many hours that each worker is willing to work and what wage. So these two are, in fact, determined by these two. That is the businesses, that mean employers and employees, they may bargain and decide on what price needs to be paid for workers. That means what would be the wages. So that means what we understand here is that, the supply and demand are the forces that controls the quantity of a product and the price of a product. So that's what we mean by forces. So the market forces are actually demand and supply. Let's take another example. In the foreign exchange market, it is the currency that is bought and sold, which is the product. Like, let's say, for example, US dollars, sterling pounds, and various other currencies in different country. They may have one of their own currency, and all the other foreign currencies are bought and sold in the market for foreign exchange. So that's the product. And the price of foreign currency is called exchange rate. And the exchange rate of whether it is dollars in the UK or maybe pounds in the US, that is, I'm talking about now in the UK, actually, we use pounds, but we don't have to buy and sell. I mean, we don't have to like buy pounds, especially. We are actually being paid in pounds. So what we do is actually, we may, in case we want to import goods from the US, or we may sell also pounds to, somebody abroad, somebody in the US or somebody in another country who still wants to, pay for us in sterling pounds. So anyway, so what I'm trying to say is this is done at a price known as the exchange rate. Okay. Next, who buys foreign currency? There are many people who may buy foreign currency. For example, an importer. Now, let's say, for example, if we are importing goods from the US, so we can't pay them using the sterling pounds. So what we do is we have to exchange it to dollars and buy dollars and pay. Right. So that means we become the buyer. But at the same time, there can be many. Now, let's say, for example, if somebody is doing an exam, which is an exam conducted by a US examination board, or someone who is traveling to other countries. So they may have to buy currencies of those countries like that. Next, who are the sellers? Who are the suppliers? There are many suppliers, one of which is the banks. So as you can see here, once again, that there are four elements in the market for foreign exchange, and there too, you can see the rate of exchange will be decided by the importer and the banks here in this particular example, or whoever who is demanding, whoever who is supplying, and that's how the rate or a price is determined. And that's what, in fact, we mean by exchange rate. Right. Sorry. That's what we mean by market forces. Right. So, as we said, the first of the market forces that we will discuss is about demand. Demand means that comes from the buyers. You can see, you have already seen earlier that in the market for labor, The demand comes from the businesses who wants workers, who hires workers. And on the other hand, in the market for foreign exchange, you see demand also comes from the importers. There are also customers who are buying uh, the, as we can see, foreign exchange there. Now, although demand is coming from the customers who buy a product, a good or service, it shouldn't be misunderstood with want. There is a slight difference between want and demand. Wanting something, I mean, that's the one that stimulates, that creates demand. But obviously, wants are not exactly demand. What are we kind of trying to say here is that, wants, that means when we want something, we want many things in life. But if we want all those many things, but we are financially not capable to pay for all those many things, then we will not be creating demand for those. Even as a business, when a business sees there are, let's say in a village, a business that wants to, sell some furniture. And the business sees that in that particular village, there are 100 families. So, what if the business brings up, 100 sets of every different furniture that they sell? That's not really going to be a good idea because although the 100 families living in that village, all of them may want to buy furniture. Not that all of them will be able to afford to that, and they are not really, going to create demand. So I think now it is very clear for you. So what's the difference between want and demand is want is the willingness of people to buy a good or service. But on the other hand, demand is the willingness as well as the ability to pay. The willingness backed by financial capability to buy that product. So if people have willingness and able to pay, then they will effectively create demand. So that's what we also mean by an effective demand. That is when people are effectively demanding that not just they have a want, but they also can pay for. Right. So in economics, as a business, the business should only think about demand of people, not the want. Right. So let's talk about demand further on. So what do we mean by demand is, of course, demand is when people want to buy products. Let's say demand for a specific good, let's say for demand for milk, demand for chocolate. So demand means that people want to buy milk and they are able to pay for milk. Now the thing is, we are actually talking about in economics, demand means we are talking about the quantity of milk, quantity of chocolate. That means how many bars of chocolate, how many liters of or packs of milk that people want to buy. So demand in economics, what we mean by demand is the quantity of goods and services that people are willing to buy and able to buy. Yes, we know that that is at different prices at a given period of time. So that's what that means. When price changes, when the price is maybe £5, £7, £12, like that, the price changes at different prices. That means every different prices that people are not really going to buy the same quantity. So different prices, what are the different quantities that people are willing to buy? That's what we mean by demand. Right. So the law of demand means that actually something that explains the nature of demand. The law of demand says this, and it is normally true actually for most of the goods. Of course, this is not 100% true for very few, for a handful of goods only, which doesn't really matter that much at the GCSE O level uh, levels, but okay, anyway. So what is that is I'm trying to say is like sometimes people like to buy certain goods and those are luxurious goods and which they buy to, show off. Such products, normally when the price goes up, people like to buy more. But what we can see in general, according to the law of demand, is when the price of goods increase, demand, that means quantities that people are willing to buy, would decrease. So, this concludes that there is a negative or inverse relationship between demand and price. They are not going in the same manner. They don't have the same relationship. They have an inverse relationship. One goes up, the other one goes down. Right. So let's look at the demand curve. So what is demand curve is simply as, we speak about demand. Demand is at different prices, different quantities that people are willing and able to buy. So the same thing, rather than, talking in theory, what we could do is we can show this in a diagram, and that particular diagram is what we mean by demand curve. And since demand and price has a negative relationship because demand curve is drawn in relation to price. So since demand and price has a negative relationship, the demand curve is downward sloping, as you would see here. Right. Then the demand schedule here, right? So that means it simply shows, okay, different prices, what are the quantities. Now, as you can see, it is very visible that when the price goes up from 100 to 500 pounds, quantity demanded of this particular product decreases all the way from 50,000 to 10,000 pounds. So if you show this in a curve relating to price and quantity demanded, then that would be a downward sloping curve like this. Price and the quantity demanded. So as price goes up, quantity demanded decreases. 100 is the price, then the quantity demanded is only 10,000. But when the price goes to 500, the quantity demanded decreases all the way to 100. So this is what we mean by 10,000, sorry, as here it's given. So this is a graphical representation of demand. Okay. Now demand can change. Yes, obviously demand can change anything. Most things don't remain the same, always change. So how can demand change is actually when demand changes, there can be two changes. As you see in this diagram, we can have the same demand curve and change can be just from one point to another, one point to another. This is what we mean by the first one, the movement along the demand curve. And sometimes demand can change in a way where the whole of the demand curve can shift to the right or to the left. So that's what we mean by shift of demand curve. So let's have a look at both of these, right? The movement along the demand curve, that happens always only for one reason. That is the change in price. As you can see here, I have drawn two demand curves here. And the price that is shown by P and the quantity is Q. This is the existing price and the quantity. So this is the price of the product. And when the price was P, maybe 5 pounds, let's say, the quantity demanded is Q. But we will see now what happens to, the demand, the quantity demanded when the price changes. For example, Let's imagine if the price decreases. When the price decreases, what we can observe is that the quantity demanded to increase. Because why? The product is becoming cheaper now. So when the products become cheaper, people can afford to buy more of that product, so they would buy more. So a drop in price from P to P1, we can see it would lead to a rise in quantity demanded from Q to Q1. So this makes a movement along the same demand curve from this point to this point. On the other hand, let's say if the price increases. Now, when the price increases, it will be hard for people to afford to buy that. So when the price increases, as you can see, the quantity demanded will decrease. So you see the price increases from P to P1 in the second demand curve, then the quantity demanded is decreasing from Q to Q1, so which makes once again a movement along the same demand curve. So simple summary here is that a movement along the demand curve occurs due to change in the price of a product. And if the price falls and quantity demanded increases, we call it an extension, and if the price rises and quantity demanded falls, we call it a contraction. Right. So now let's move on to discuss shifts of demand curve. Right. Actually, a shift of demand curve can be done by many factors, not just one. Now, price, if the price of a product changes, then it will only make a movement. But if the price doesn't change, price remains unchanged, but something else affects the demand, then the price will stay in the same place, so the change will not be in the same demand curve. Because while the price is there as it was before, only the quantity will change, means that then we will have to draw a new demand curve there. Right, let's see. One example is advertising I have given. Rightly, we'll talk about each one of these causes. I think I have discussed about maybe 7 or 8 causes here. Let's see. Yes, one of the cause is advertising. Advertising. Now, businesses, why do businesses advertise? Simply, the businesses want to sell more. Advertising is aimed at that. So, when a business advertises, what happens is people, if the advertisement becomes successful, people, more people get to know, or it becomes more popular with people, and that would actually increase the demand. As you can see here, let's imagine the initial price was here. Price was P and the quantity was Q. But then what happens is the business advertisers, even though the price remains P, still the quantity demanded increases to Q1. So this point is not on this demand curve. So we have to draw a new demand curve here, D1. So what we see is after a successful advertising campaign, the demand curve shifts outward. Right. So this is one of the cause of shift of demand curve. Next cause is the changes in income. Now, some of you might think, okay, when income increases, what's going to happen? Yeah, income increases, so demand will increase. Right. But actually, that's not true. That means when income increases, always demand is not going to increase. So you have to be very careful when the exam question says there is an increase in consumer income or there is a decrease in consumer income. So what would be the effect on the demand for this particular product? So what's, as I emphasize, this particular product? So that means first you need to look at what kind of product it is, because depending on the type of product, different products would have different changes in demand due to changes in income. Right. Let's look at it using a different, now please don't misunderstand that this is a demand curve, because normally the demand curve is drawn that y-axis here, y-axis will have the price and the x-axis will have demand, but here I have given price, sorry, demand on the y-axis and x-axis is income. So this is actually, I'm just trying to explain you using how changes in income would affect the demand for different products. Okay. Now let's say, for example, some products like cars, luxuries, or let's say the normal goods that we buy on day to day, like, I mean, maybe we buy clothing, t-shirts, winter clothes, all of these. So what happens here, these normal goods that we buy, when the price, I'm sorry, here we are talking about income here, when our income increases, we are bound to buy more of these because we are. Now, let's say, for example, we were not able to buy cars before, but now our income level has increased to considerably high. So maybe we may consider buying cars for luxury goods. But on the other hand, when our income decreases, what happens is we will not spend much money on such normal or luxury goods. So that means the normal goods or luxury goods, what happens is as our income increases, demand would increase. Now let's look at another example. There are some goods, that people consider to be, of not that high quality. People think these are of low quality products. And they are just buying these simply because they are forced to buy due to their income. Maybe, in some societies, traveling by bus can be, I mean, actually, this can differ from societies to society. Actually, public transport is, you know, at very good quality in most countries. So there it is not really considered. But in some societies where the public transport is bad, and another example is bread. In some societies, bread, isn't really a very, uh, good quality product. But in some societies, it's different. So what happens is people buy less of bread, less of uh, maybe travel by buses as their income increases, as you would see here. Because what happens is when someone's income increases, as their income increases, what happens is initially they would buy a little extra because maybe a family needed 2 loaves of bread a day, but they couldn't afford to buy bread. So maybe at the beginning they would buy only one. And then as their income increases, they would buy two. But as their income further increases, instead of buying bread, maybe they will switch to burgers and pizzas and all that. So the demand for inferior goods, that means people, when they consider it of low quality, the demand would decrease with an increase in income. Then we have another type of good. So as you can see, the purpose that I'm trying to explain this is always a change in income is not going to increase the demand for every single good. Right. Another example is, let's say, there are some products, regardless of our income, we use the same quantity. maybe medicinal drugs or salt, these things, we are not going to buy as we become richer more medicines or more salt. If we need a certain amount, let's say 500 grams of salt a month, let's say, maybe that's even too much. But let's imagine, okay, if that is what we need for a family, so we will just buy that regardless of our income. So what happens is the demand would be always the same quantity. We call such products staple goods. All right. So now let's see how the income changes would affect the demand. Let's take an example of a type of product which would be affected by income. Now, let's say inferior goods. Right. Now, this is the demand for a particular good, but which is considered to be inferior and its price. So now the incomes increase. So as the income of people increases, what will happen? It will shift the demand curve inside, because when their income increases, they will move from this inferior to a normal good. They will not buy this good that much as they used to buy before. So this will shift the demand curve inside, right? Okay, let's look at another cause of shift of demand, right? Now, actually, we took a little time first to understand the shift, although using advertising, but first you needed to understand. And then also we took a little time discussing types of, different goods, because to discuss like how income affects. And even this one is going to take us a little time. But after that, the causes of demand, we will discuss more quicker. All right. Today's economics video is going to be a little longer. All right. Okay. So let's see. Now, what do we mean by price of other goods? That means already we saw that, when the price increases, quantity demanded decreases. Price decreases, quantity demanded increases. But we are actually not talking about the price of the same good. We are talking about price of other goods. That means price of another good sometimes may affect the demand for a specific good. This can be discussed under two headings called substitutes and, okay, first we will discuss substitute and then we will come to the other one. All right. Um, complementary goods is what? But first, let's talk about this. Okay. One is substitute. What is the meaning of substitute? Means these are goods that can be used for the same purpose interchangeably, one or the other. Right. Now, let's say this is the price of soap and the quantity demanded of soap. So this is the demand curve for soap. Now, what happens in the market is, as we can see, for example, let's say demand for, soap curve is what is given, but soap can be substituted with washing powder. Now, some people were using soap and some people were using washing powder. Let's imagine that the price of washing powder increased. When the price of washing powder increases, what we can see is that people buying washing powder might switch to soap. So demand for soap may increase from cube to Q1, even though the soap price is still the same. Because people think that now washing powder is relatively expensive, so some of them who use washing powder, they also start buying soap. So soap prices remain unchanged, but the quantity for soap increases, so that makes an outward shift. So this happened when? After the rise in the price of washing powder. Right. So this is how price of a substitute may affect the demand of another substitute. Now let's talk about complementary in the change of price of other goods. Right. What are complements or complementary goods means? These are goods which are not in competition. These are goods which needs to be used together. Like let's say car and petrol, uh, camera and the digital cards, which used to be discussed as film rolls long time back. Now almost it's not there at all. All right. Okay. So complements means two goods that are needed to be used together. Now here, what's given here is the demand curve for petrol. So price of petrol is P and the quantity demanded for petrol is Q. Now what happens, let's say in the market, cars become cheaper. So when the price of cars decrease, people will be buying more cars because car is a luxury good. So when a luxury becomes a little cheaper, it will become affordable. So then when people buy more cars, obviously more of these cars will need more petrol. More car users means more petrol. So demand for petrol will increase from Q to Q1 when the price of petrol remains still the same due to a fall in the price of cars was this. Okay, so this is how the price of another complement can affect the demand of a complement. So we have discussed three causes of demand curve. Factors which may shift the demand curve. Now let's move on to discuss some other causes. Right. One, changes in taste and fashion. Right. Now what happens when, you know, people their taste, their fashion on certain good, certain service, certain hairstyle, when it is something that becomes highly fashionable, no matter the price, regardless of the price, demand for that will increase. But once the product becomes out of fashion, the product is not so fashionable as it used to be. So it was, long time back, it was, you know, highly fashionable. So many people were buying. They were not bothered about the price. Even the price is the same. They were buying a lot. But now the product is, becoming out of fashion. So it will go to the house of fashions. Sorry. What happens is when the product is something that is becoming out of fashion, demand for the product will decrease even though the price remains the same. So that will also make a shift inward. Population, right? Population also, when we talk about population, be careful to discuss different segments. That means which type of population is increasing, whether it is uh, childbirth is high and so the infant population is increasing, or due to better health care, the adult population or the, you know, or aging population is increasing and so on. So whichever the segment of the population increases, that will also affect the demand. For example, let's say if the childbirth is high, infant population increases in the country, then demand for goods and services that are, demanded by parents with infants, that means children's child care products, all that will increase. And on the other hand, let's say, for example, the better health care leading to people living longer. So there is a higher age in population. So in that case, demand for goods and services, needed by them would increase and so on. So different segment increases, the demand would increase. Next is seasonal factors, right? So as we are in the winter, snowing and all that, so normally during this season, regardless of the price, demand for things like, winter jackets, rubber boots, maybe coffee, tea, these things would increase. And demand for gas for heating would increase. But on the other hand, once the summer comes, demand for electricity for air conditioning, for cooling, and demand for, let's say, uh, slippers, rubber slippers, and ice cream and sort of things would increase. So here, the demand for these products are not affected by its price, but by seasonal factors. Next is government influence. Now, let's say, for example, nowadays we have a current example for this, that is about wearing masks. Now, in many countries, of course, the period of pandemic is past and there is no more rule, but the rules have been relaxed. Okay, we can see when the government had a rule that you have to wear mask in public places, then demand for masks increased. And now, since the rules are relaxed, demand for masks has decreased a lot. Only a few people who are still health concerned, they wear, but not all of them, and it is not something a must. So here we can see we are not demanding a particular product simply because it is cheaper, but we are demanding more simply because the government is influencing the demand. And the next is rate of interest. Cost of borrowing, availability of credit, all have been put together because they are relating. Now, rate of interest. What is the rate of interest is, now when we save money in the bank will give us a reward. That is interest. Or when we borrow money from a bank, borrow money or by using a credit card, we have to pay an interest, rate of interest. So that is called cost of borrowing. And availability of credit means whether there's plenty of goods and services which we can buy on credit easily without so many conditions, rules, regulations, providing documentation. If it is easy to buy on credit, that's what we mean by the availability of credit. So when interest rates are low and the credit is easily available, then the demand for goods and services will be high because many people, they don't buy goods or service from the existing money they have. Most of them, they would buy using the credit cards or borrow money to buy maybe expensive products like vehicles and buildings on mortgage and all that. So here what happens is demand is, instead of the price, demand is affected by the interest rate and whether it is, easy to borrow and easy to buy. Finally, we have one more factor which affects demand is habits, customs, and religious belief. Right. Habits, that means people's habits or customs that they follow, or maybe specific religious belief, may affect the demand for certain goods instead of price, regardless of price. That means people are not bothered about whether it is expensive or cheap, whether the price is increasing or decreasing. They demand these products, just because of their religious belief. There are plenty of examples. I don't want to specifically mention those here. Based on different religious beliefs, different customs in different societies, you can see in certain religion or certain religious places or certain historical places, you can see some goods that are being sold more, demanded more compared to another area, another place, or in another society, right? Okay. So these are the factors that may shift the demand curve, right? So today we have discussed one of the market forces, that's demand. I'll see you in another video where I'll discuss with you market force supply. Until then, take care. Bye.